G'day, how are you?
It's one of those days
Yeah,
where it's back to back everything. How are you?
not quite as back to back for me, but I do sympathize, and I sympathize with everyone else listening to the recording who's had those days, and who's managed to squeeze an hour into watch a recording instead. G'day.
Hey, Vern.
Hello, how are you all?
We're getting by.
Excellent.
So I just dropped a link to the notes. Standard operating procedure applies. Add yourself to the attendee list.
Are we just expecting John to join?
That's the hope, since he kind of kicked all this off.
Yes.
Hey guys,
Well, I'm not a guy, but hello.
hello. Hi Vicky.
I've dropped the link to the agenda. Manoir, if you can sign in and let us know that you're here. We're going to be waiting a few more minutes for people to show up.
Okay.
And my hope is that we actually have something to talk about.
That's always the $1,000,000 question, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
Feast
Jonathan
and
was
famine
kind of
was my
driving it.
experience.
Yeah, exactly. I know that Andrew from Wipro is going to be late.
I'll have a hard stop in 30 minutes, but hopefully we can cover most of the fun things from in that time frame.
Howdy, Eric.
Hello, everyone.
Well, we're starting at 5 after, whether Jonathan is here or not, so. All right, that's 5 after. Let's see, at first, let me. All right, Eric, I've just added you to the attendee list. So hello, everyone. I guess I'm driving this bus since I kind of set up the call. But that was primarily administrative rather than anything else. So I'll be relying on you all to drive us forward. Who wants to be our scribe today and take notes?
My experience, nobody ever wants it. I can try.
You're wonderful. Thank you,
Sorry,
Sean.
I would, but I'm going to drop off midway, so I'll
Okay.
do it next time.
Excellent. All right, and who was not with us last week? Do we have any new friends who want to introduce themselves? All right, bring it on, Jacques.
So I'm Jack. I work for Shopify, as it says in the notes already. I remember talking to Jonathan about the slight overrepresentation of vendors, and sorry to my Wipro friends, service providers in the machinations. So we were keen that there'd be some sort of end user voice, and I think it's still early days, but I'm hoping that that will become more of a thing as we go, and that we ensure that there's a distinct end user voice in the community.
Hi, everyone. Varun Badwar, founder, CEO of Endor Labs. Prior to this, spent several years at Palo Alto Networks. Faced the pain firsthand. Decided to start a company around it, but mostly been an enterprise guy before. I was talking to Jonathan in Austin, and I was just kind of bringing the perspective, which is very similar to Jack's, which is, there's a lot of conversation about coming in from the open source, the contributor, the maintainer side, making their lives easier, which we all have to do. But in the same vein, you've got to think from an inside out enterprise perspective. How do you help enterprises consume not just more open source, but also all of this lovely tooling this community builds? But there's a new tool a week out there. It's very hard for an enterprise to wrap their arms around what to use, how to use, and how to operationalize. So tools are easy. Operationalization is hard in the enterprise. So just coming in and hoping to bridge the gap.
Welcome. So before we get started on our pretty short agenda today, not that there's not much to say, but the agenda is short. Is there anything else people would like to add to the agenda right now? If you look at the agenda doc, we've got reviewing the definition that nobody has worked on yet, including myself. And then any other business. Is there any other business people would like to add to the agenda for today? Something you would like to discuss either today or in the future?
Well, just one question. Maybe this is a good time as we get into the definition, but end user, is that even the right terminology? Because end user, I get it, it's more on the consumer side of open source, but if this is purely like an enterprise or organizational component, like I just wonder if that's the right name. It took me a while to figure out what the end user group meant on Slack before I joined it. So just a bigger question as we think about the definition. End user definition typically becomes an individual. To me, an enterprise that's a collection of end users maybe needs to be called something else. But it goes back to the function of definition.
Yeah, I think that will go definitely, that goes hand in hand with the definition to make sure that we do define it. And that's, I think, why Jonathan found it very important to start there at the very beginning of this process.
I might also squeeze
ahead.
in a mention of a project I've worked on called SEER, which is talking about how to prioritize projects according to risk. Some of you may have seen my presentation at Open Source Summit North America. You might not have, but also for people who are watching the recording later, I wanted to mention it in passing, because I think it has some bearing on our thinking.
Max, is there a link to go find more information? If you can just jot it down, or if you had a talk on this subject, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll dig that out.
And we'll make sure the link gets in the notes as well. And if you haven't seen the notes yet, it's pretty much the only thing in chat right now. But I know Zoom falls. You don't see the chat if you show up late, which Varun, you did not. You were right on time. Jacques, you want to just start with the SEER proposals or your SEER stuff so we can just get that out of the way and see whether there's something that is going to perhaps impact the definition in any way, or how we view end user?
Sure. So trying to give a very potted summary, this comes out of the Securing Critical Projects group. In one of the missions of the Securing Critical Projects group is to identify projects that need attention and to rank them, basically according to how much attention they need, or how soon, or in what priority order should they be attended to. And this is necessary in no small part because Alpha Omega needs it. Alpha Omega has limited resources and unlimited ambitions, and we need to work out in what order, particularly what projects we identify as belonging to the Alpha bucket, as well as projects to the Omega bucket. So towards that, we have the criticality score, which is data-driven. We also have efforts like the Harvard Census of open source software, which is also data-driven. But the argument is that not all data that we wish was available is available. Some things are unstructured, semi-structured, locked up inside people's heads. The example I like to give is that, we can see the download counts for something, but we can't see that it's used in medical devices very easily, right? There's no simple, countable, or automated way to retrieve that information. So the basis of SEER is to elicit expert opinion, to deliberately go out and find people who know something about projects and ask them to say, how likely is something bad to happen with regards to this software product or project? And when it does happen, how bad are we talking? What's the scale of magnitude? There's a lot more detail than that. There's a prototype. Hopefully the talk will be online in the next week or two, so that will be easier for folks to see it in more detail. The reason I bring this up to the end user group is that, again, I don't want it to be dominated by vendors only. Like, I want to make sure that there's as wide and as variegated a mix of inputs as possible. That the more and more different kinds of people give their opinions, give input to this process, the better the estimates will be, and the better we'll be able to prioritize that work.
So I have a question about the goal of the SEER project. I mean, it's a very, I would say, a noble goal to identify like exactly how the applications or the libraries are used. And that gives a lot of perspective to the priority that can be given to that particular one. What's the process like? Maybe like it can be like TLDR and like you can point us to the talk when that's available, but I'd like to know about the process that you're following. I mean, I come from academia before in my like past life, and I've done like empirical research on that. So I'm just like academically interested about the process that you're following.
Yeah, so the proposed process is essentially that we take experts, we give them some onboarding training, so some information about how to perform estimates effectively. There are some simple sort of tricks and techniques that improve estimate performance. The second part is what's called calibration, where we give them a series of tests and give them rapid feedback on how they perform on those estimation tasks. That tends to improve performance as well. And then thirdly, we give them a sort of like a feed of projects to assess. And for each project, we say, what's your 3-point estimate, your estimate of worst case, best case, and most likely case for the frequency of something bad happening and the magnitude when it does happen. And we roll those up into a distribution, and then we roll those distributions up into a ranking. So I do go into it in detail in the talk. So I'm sorry that I'm hand waving away, but I also don't want to hijack the whole meeting, and also cognizant that Varun has another meeting coming up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does for now. Thank you.
Cool.
So would you like to, I'd imagine this is purely an FYI at this moment. And
Yes.
You're not immediately recruiting end users, but this is something that at some point you would like to recruit end users for once we have more of a community.
Yeah, I do want to make sure that we have as wide a spread as possible. So as and when that system comes online over the next, I don't know, 6, 12, 18 months, who knows how the wind will blow. I will be definitely making sure that we get as many people from end user organizations as possible to spread out the expertise.
Okay. Well, that's a good FYI, so we can keep that in mind in the future. I think part of the end user group is we're still kind of trying to figure out what even this is. I think Varun, as he pointed out, it is kind of hard to tell right now what this is. So what it is at the moment is nascent. We are very early on in this process.
So on that note, I mean, I actually went to the doc which you created to start a discussion about formulating a definition for what end user is. And And then I did some search, and interestingly, like there's been some research that's also done in the academia. So I'm now looking at it from the, and there's some like papers about like how like these impact. And then there's also the industry definition of like that's also provided through some links in like Wikipedia and others that are also listed. So I added, I think like I remember adding like one paper that was done like as considered as one of the early research in that particular list. The point that I am trying to make is when you are looking at this, again, I'm just a consumer in this particular case. I want to like listen into the conversation and learn, but at the same time, I thought that like when formulating a conversation or a definition, there's already been some work done in the academia. Of course, they're trying to understand something that's happening in the industry. So maybe like bringing in that perspective as well as the industry perspective would be important.
And sorry, Munawar, are you saying like this is regarding the definition of end users? You're saying that there's some work that's been done, and we don't
I mean,
have to remember.
typically in an industry like the end users of a software would be like it could also be like within the organization who are like the product owners who's doing that. So that also falls into the broad perspective. Whereas like when I looked into the academic definition, it was probably like focusing on external users more than the other. So there's that perspective that again, frankly, I don't have a clear idea. I'm also trying to learn, but I thought that there's two different thought processes that are going here, and somebody who's more knowledgeable should be like bringing this together.
So if you look at the document, which is linked in the agenda doc, and I will add yet another Google Doc link to the chat. I put it together last week primarily for people to have a place to start working on it. And then, as usually happens in my day and my week, I got busy doing other things and have not looked at it since. But it looks like most other people haven't either, because what we have still, except for the link that you added, Munawar, is just a link of essentially prior art, other definitions of end users, and examples of what other people have done, including fairly relevantly how CNCF defines end user. And that's relevant because it's another Linux Foundation thing, right? And recently I was in a call for a completely different LF sub-foundation where people were leaning very hard on the fact that CNCF already has a definition of end user. We shouldn't come up with a new one. And so I went to look at it because I thought, well, that's great. I would love it if someone else had a definition for us that we could just cherry pick and use. But if you look at the definition of end user they have, I don't think it's valid for us. Just drop the link in there. They say the end user community is a vendor neutral group. I like that, except we're not vendors, but neutral I like. Of more than 145 organizations using cloud native technologies to build their products and services. Okay, well, we are not specifically about cloud native technologies.
Yeah, like
exactly.
I'm not interested in like the vendors who consume cloud native technologies to create further products. I'm interested in like the last step before a regular market consumer. So, you know, like the step before you get to somebody who buys banking, somebody who buys food at the supermarket, you know, so the person who vends something that is not technology or technology services. To me, that's the thing. So it's, to me, I've usually thought of this as more of an exclusionary definition. Like I define what a technology company is and what a service company is, and then I say, not that.
I think that's an interesting approach. But what I want to know is using what, right? I mean, we're end users. What are we end using? To me,
Right.
we're all end users of free and open source software projects. And we need to make sure that what we are using is secure.
But is it
Because
from an
otherwise, how we are using that will itself be insecure, right? If you're using rotten food in an otherwise good recipe, your otherwise good recipe will be shot to hell, and it will be a bad recipe. It will taste bad, it might poison people. So that's what we're looking at, are essentially what are the ingredients we are putting into our product, our end product. And that's how we are the end user, because we are the ones creating the thing, the end user of open source projects.
But that's where I guess an end user could be a college student writing code. It could be somebody in the enterprise. And that's kind of where I had the question initially. I brought up, like, are we thinking about this from an enterprise perspective, or I don't know if enterprise is too narrow for definition, but something about a company annotation, like there's a business user versus a individual doing it for fun, or a hobbyist, or a college student, or something else. Like, what is the scope? My understanding of this is much more enterprise-centric viewpoint, but I could be wrong again. The guy who had this in mind is not here today to tell us what he had in mind.
Well, I believe it's because in Wipro, we work with a lot of different end users, and some of them are enterprises, right? Some of them are telcos, some of them are governments. We have academia, right? And we also ourselves are end users, because we are consuming open source to build solutions for these people. So it is rather a large group.
Hi all, this is Andrew. Sorry for joining late. When Wipro joined, I had this conversation with Brian about establishing the end user group. And the idea, the focus really was on enterprises and like Jonathan's, like, Citi and others, as opposed to vendors, which is what the community is mostly made up of today, right? Now, the end user consumers in enterprises denote a large global organization. It could be maybe mid-market, also definitely public sector users.
Right.
But that was the initial conversation we had.
And I think that's exactly my understanding, right? Whatever name we give it, but I think, like, we should be focused on organizations, right? Whether public sector, private sector, but we're really looking at this in the context of organizations, not necessarily individuals outside of the context of an organization.
Right, those are more traditional community members or participants.
Correct. You're right, and they're already covered with a lot of efforts that are going on within the community. So I completely agree with you, Andrew. I think, and that's why before you joined, my first question was, is end user even the right terminology? Because it kind of leads to this confusion then of what it is.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with changing names while it's cheap to change names.
If you have an alternative.
Yeah.
Consuming organizations, downstream consumers, like,
I think something around organizations. I like something around organizations. If enterprise is too narrow, I think organization context is important.
Well, I think this is one of those things where it might be helpful to fall back on the prior art of other Linux Foundation groups and beyond Linux Foundation groups, because we do have CNCF end users, and that is about organizations. We do have OpenStack has an end user group, and that is for organizations. Various Apache projects have end user groups, and those are for primarily organizations. So I think because end user does have this history within free and open source software foundations and projects, it probably makes sense to stick with that and just be very clear in whatever documentation we provide. What do we mean by that? And that starting documentation is the definition doc that we're working on, to which I've already added specifically just a note. This is organizations, not necessarily individuals outside of the context of the organization. So we can make sure that we scope this appropriately. Because you're right, Vern.
We need to have like a 2-3 sentence definition, right? Just simple and clear. The challenge, I think, with consumers using the term consumer, which is something that's been traditionally used for this, is the fact that people, organizations that are large producers also are large consumers, right? Microsofts and Googles of the world not only are producers, but they're also consumers. So I think we need to, even large enterprise, what we would call enterprises, like a city, right, is now a producer and not just a consumer. So it's not actually a simple definition.
No, I don't think there's any sort of like, if I wanted to get fancy, like crisp logic approach, something I could program to a computer as a Boolean. It's more of a fuzzy definition in the sense of fuzzy logic. So things belonging to things with sets of degrees of membership. And the question I often use that's helpful, I use this a lot when I was consulting, is what do they pay you for? What do people give you money in exchange for? And that's really the business that you're in. Even if your culture is dominated by one or another sort of subdivisions or kinds of professional outlook, it's the money, what they give you money for, that ultimately is the business that you're in. So, for example, people think of Google as a technology company. It sort of is, but really the money that comes through the door is mostly coming through the door for advertising operations. And there's a fair amount of money now coming through for cloud services.
But how does that, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing, just trying to understand a little bit more. How does a Comcast or a Verizon or a British Telecom fit into that kind of a category? Because at the end of the day, they receive a lot of money for telecommunications services, but they're both a producer and consumer of open source in large quantities.
Well, see, now I'm starting to think that maybe my definition is self-defeating.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
No, it's useful. This is what we should do. I like to be embarrassed as soon as possible. It gets it out of the way quickly and reduces the surface and the area under the curve of embarrassment. It is tricky.
Use the word primarily in here. So primarily consumer, primarily end user. That gives us a little bit of fudging room.
I buy that. So, I mean, primarily it's a great wiggle word.
We'll use the case of Jonathan since he's not here. Citibank is primarily an end user or consumer of open source, even though they do some contribution or production.
Sorry about the typing noise.
Oh, darn you. How dare you use your keyboard?
I'm going to have a nice clicky one, or I don't think I'm doing anything. I got to convince my fiance in the next room that they do actually pay me to do something.
Somehow I suspect that you're not going to have a problem with that.
Well, she watched the SIA video after I'd uploaded it and had great feedback. And so it was unfortunate that I had finished it at that time. Sorry, Varun, I didn't mean to go off too topic, but thanks for coming today.
Yeah, thanks, Varun. As soon as I can figure out where or how to get the video uploaded, I'll do that and post it in the chat. I'll probably need Jen or Jory's help with that.
So maybe we look at it as a bell curve and we solve for the 80-20 rule. If you look at enterprises or large organizations, the vast bulk are still primarily end users are consumers. If you look in healthcare, you look in other verticals, even in public sector organizations across the planet, they by and large are still primarily consumers of open source, not producers. So rather than try and create a really technical definition that addresses 100% of the audience, we come up with a more generic one that addresses the 80% of the audience.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get 100%.
No.
So what's currently in the end user definition doc is organizations that primarily consume open source projects. not necessarily consuming individuals outside of the context of organizations, which needs a lot of wordsmithing, but is primarily just notes for now to make sure that we capture what we're talking about here. That's a thumbs up from Jacques. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good, it captures the gist of where we're heading. As you say, it needs some magic, some sprinkles.
I would just take off the word projects, just primarily consume open source.
Done.
I don't know why it bugs me, but
It's okay. That's part of wordsmithing. Okay.
I like it. It's straightforward, it's simple. We can,
Sure.
wordsmith a bit.
Okay. Wow. Did we actually come up with a definition that we can build on?
I think we did a thing.
Gosh, still have 24 minutes left in
I was
this
gonna s-
call.
I was going to say I need to look at my watch and set a beep.
Go us. Okay, well, the any other business we have is fairly minimal. Jacques already filled us in about SEER, and so we've got a heads up on that coming down the pipe. And Varun wanted to know whether end user is the right name. It looks like we've kind of settled on yes, as long as we define that. Oops, sorry. Suddenly type
I
things.
think we want to call out, define end users as both public, public and private sector.
Okay,
Despite the public sector being huge consumers of open source, many times they are overlooked.
yeah, let's do it. Public and private sector organizations that primarily consume open source rather than
Produce.
create.
Yeah.
Produce, let's use produce. Okay, that's good. I think that's a good clarification too. Because we do want to make sure that that the public sector is included. There is a great deal of that happening in government and academia.
Yeah, and they have a different perspective of the world. Like it's
Yeah.
an enterprise is thinking in terms of the profit and loss and things like reputational damage and so on. That public organization has to think in terms of impact on citizens, safety of people and so on.
Yeah, and eventually it could end up that we, if this working group really takes off, maybe we'll end up with a public sector SIG and a private sector SIG talking about
When?
specific things.
Not if, when.
I look forward to that day, but for now, I'm gonna go with if at the moment. So that's pretty good. I think that's a good. We've got a good start to a definition that will need some wordsmithing, and then we can move from there. What would we start to? What would be next on our list of things to do? Right.
I think mission will be pretty important. What are we actually trying to achieve? Both as a user group and for the audience. Right? There are kind of two angles here.
Okay. We can add that to the definition doc, I think. That would make sense to put there, and we can just sort of iterate on it. Does anyone have any first initial thoughts about mission and charter for this group?
Well, I think there's a lot of alignment with the definition of OpenSSF, right? We just need to maybe, I'm trying to look it up. I saw it recently for some reason. Pull up the website.
About, what if we just click about for OpenSSF? Does that go anywhere? No, because it's WordPress. Charter, how about that? That's gonna have a big old PDF thing. Yeah, it is. Thanks, LF. About technical vision for OpenSSF.
The charter, what I get is the participation agreement.
Yeah, exactly. How about this technical vision for OpenSSF? It's under the TAC. I haven't read it yet. I just found it, but it sounds like a good title.
Yeah, I like the technical vision as an inspiration. In terms of the conversations that I had with Jonathan when we were sort of mutually commiserating about how we sort of saw the current composition of OpenSSF leadership, I would say that we were determined that end users should have a voice that was distinct and unignorable.
Impactful. Yeah.
Impactful, yeah. Right. So distinct and impactful. So able to ensure that the particular interests of folks who don't do this, so to speak, for a living, or for whom it is not necessarily their day-to-day or primary focus, are heard. And that can be difficult because of the simple economics of the thing, that if you don't do a thing for money, you're probably not doing it full time. You probably don't have the bandwidth to spend a lot of time to OpenSSF meetings. But to the degree that you can, you want to ensure that you get a fair shake of the tree.
I'm typing as you talk, so trying to capture these excellent thoughts, and because otherwise I will forget you ever said those lovely words.
I'll forget them too.
That's okay.
And
Although we are recording this. So.
I think we can distill from a little bit of each of the different elements of the technical vision. I'm just kind of going through it and thinking about it, but I think the last sentence is pretty important here. The OpenSSF provides tools, services, training, infrastructure, and resources available to end users, use our definition, to achieve, and then that's where we distill some of the elements of the part of the technical vision above it.
I mean, OpenSSF provides the tools, services, training, infrastructure, and resources, and the ones to whom they're providing them are the end users, frankly, as well as developers.
But I think
it's a sort of a mix. I'm sorry, Andrew. It's a sort of a mix. So there's some provision of services to what I think of as end users. There's some provision of services to the entire world without distinction or identification. But there's also sort of stuff in the middle where particular projects are interfaced with and given assistance. So, for example, you like the assistance that's been given to Node.js, or the assistance that has been mooted amongst those of us who participate in package ecosystems. Like what is it we want the OpenSSF to help us with that we struggle to do by ourselves individually. So there's several, I think. Sorry for cutting you off.
Well, and
I think go ahead, Andrew.
Whatever the OpenSSF provides, we want to get in there that it has the distinct and impactful voice of the end users, so the consumers. Right. I think that's important to communicate here in the mission.
Yeah, I think that is one thing in all the conversations we've been having that has been missing, right? I hear a lot from people in cybersecurity, InfoSec. I hear a lot, primarily thanks to you, Jacques, for putting together that group for package management, and a lot about developers. But the target audience of the end user, they don't get heard yet.
Yeah, that's been my feeling. I participate in these groups, and I do sort of like the work of OpenSSF, core OpenSSF. But for example, I have peers in other parts of the organization who have a much more consumer-focused orientation towards the things that the OpenSSF does. They want to know practical things about, like, I have a question about salsa, you know, and sure, they can participate in the salsa work group, but what I'm driving at is that there will be more and more of these questions and more things where we'll say, we have a distinct interest that doesn't fit the current map. That comes back to the fact that we have a role where we consume, and we don't have necessarily the bandwidth to move upstream and to participate in that way, but we still deserve a voice.
Mhm.
How about the mission or charter is to ensure the distinct and impactful voice of end users is heard in the delivery of the technical vision of OpenSSF.
The development, not just delivery, but development.
The development and delivery
Mhm.
and delivery of the technical vision of OpenSSF.
I think that's
I like
good. I really like that.
Yeah.
And what about adding, I'm going to think a part of our mission also is to bring more end users to this working group. Right, we need, I think it's important that we get some other verticals represented here. It'd be great to have someone from public sector, from healthcare, from telco, not the dev side of telco, but the consumption side of telco.
I would put that more in the goals.
Yeah, that's fine.
Recruit more users and their perspectives. Bring more. I can't type. This is all going in the end users definition mission document, by the way. The end users. We're just gonna start calling it a working group for now. Why not?
The E-triple-G, E-triple-U-G,
E triple U. What's the triple?
UW.
Oh, look at you being all clever.
The
The
EOG,
pen, the EUG, yes, the EUG.
Yuck.
no, the
Yuck.
the U as in ew.
Yeah, we do have to be careful with EU because people are going to think, what? You have to be in the European Union. All the Brits table flip their way out. So I think that's the next place to go is, okay, that's one goal of the working group. What are some of the other end goals of the working group?
Just thinking through. Recruitment also leads to, making sure that there is a representative input or voice from all relevant or most relevant industries. I don't know how to frame that. I don't know that all may be too strong. Is it the needs of highly regulated industries such as financial services and healthcare are going to be a little bit different than, say, retail or travel, right? And it'd be good to have their input.
Yeah, we want as varied a cross section as possible, and we want to be able to have the mechanism or the developed muscle to smoothly escalate particular concerns. So if somebody comes to us and says, we have a problem in healthcare with X, Y, and Z, we want to be able to switchboard them to the groups that they can participate in, or be able to escalate to TAC and governing board quickly.
I think that is one goal we should have is ensuring there is end user representation in OpenSSF leadership, be that and end user representative on the board and or the TAC. I mean, frankly, I think that's going to be very, very important.
I think the TAC especially. Yeah.
Yeah, that was also part of our griping when we sort of went, hang on, there's nobody on TAC who's downstream of all of this.
Yeah, because whatever we do has to be implementable, essentially. And these are the folks that will be the primary implementers. So that's why I think it's really important for us to have that representation on the TAC.
Yeah. Jacques, you're not on the TAC, you just attend like I do, right?
Yeah, I'm like a bad smell. I'm all over the place.
Yeah. Not that I meant to agree with the bad smell part.
It's a trap.
It was. Okay, those are two good goals. So bringing more end users and their perspectives into the working group to ensuring representation from as many industries as possible. For instance, we will need the input from highly regulated industries and the public sector, which we don't have represented whatsoever yet. But
We don't have that anywhere.
yeah,
And we should, given the meetings in DC, we made enough contacts. We should be able to reach out to them and get someone from some agency to participate.
Mhm.
well, and not simply, the US agencies. I know for a fact that Open UK is an associate member of OpenSSF, but I've yet to see any Open UK or any UK government people in OpenSSF events. Amanda's a really dear friend of mine, so I can poke her and say, send someone to calls. But having, we can get perspectives from multiple places.
I think actually I'm going to suggest that we extend, as well as representation from as many industries and sectors as possible, also as many regions or geos.
Yes.
Good idea.
Yep.
Oh, okay, you got it. Cool. Today, the role of Jacques is played by Anonymous Turtle. So that's what you look like on my side. No, that's an excellent addition. Thank you. And then the other goal we have right now is ensure end user representation in OpenSSF leadership, both TAC and the governing board. Is there another goal we want to add for now? Keeping in mind we can always modify in the future. What do we want to accomplish here?
I think those are the big ones. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
don't want to
agree.
overload the goals and sort of be trying to shoot in 10 different directions.
I totally agree.
So not like many other user groups.
Exactly.
Give it time.
Yeah, we'll have scope creep.
Yeah, we'll be responsible for gardening, and it'll get out of hand. Magazine collection.
Okay, so we've got a definition that needs wordsmithing. We've got a one-line mission charter, which is great. I love short, sweet. Couple of primary goals. What do we want to talk about in our next call?
I think we need to still refine the vision and the mission a bit and set clear goals with some timelines.
I would say, Jacques, are you capturing that in the notes? I'm on the wrong tab. Awesome. I love it when someone else is able to scribe. I would say we work on those in this document. So, so what was that? You said we need to wordsmith this. We need to, you said something about the,
Set some goals and timelines.
okay, set timelines for these. Set timelines for these. I'm adding comments to the document.
Like in the next quarter, since we're coming into it, we want to be able to recruit, 3 more end users, or whatever it may be.
Okay, deliverables, targets. Okay, I've added comments to the document so we can remember that. So I would suggest that for our next call, we all go into this end users document, the definition document, and just try to start answering some of these questions. And
Okay.
then we can talk about it. So work on it asynchronously, and then we can come back and talk about it ideally next week. So I will try and get a doodle out today so I can get them all scheduled on Monday.
I should
We
warn
can
that I
have
may not,
call.
I may not be able to make that one. I will be in Australia for a few weeks.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes, it's a thing. But it does mean I'll be 12 hours offset from Eastern time.
Yeah, it is currently. Oh, it's almost 6 a.m. in Hobart right now, but you're going to Perth, aren't you?
I'm going to Perth. So it's
Yeah.
3:51 in the morning.
3:51, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Well, maybe, I mean, that's why we do asynchronous, right? And we will have this recorded and get it uploaded as soon as I can figure out where and how. Well, that's great. I think this is excellent progress. And then we can answer these questions async and come back to discuss them next week. And
Discuss and come up with hopefully a final on a couple of these things.
yeah, I think that would be great. Okay, in that case, I think we are good for today.
Yeah. Thank you, Vicky and Andrew. Thanks so much for your input. It was really helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Jacques. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye, Manoir.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Bye. all.
Bye, Eric.